I mean, even the general public recognizes that, yes, this is an issue, and yes, it's a problem. Is it, so there's a kind of a general growing recognition of PTSD?
Yeah, we think like a mental health diagnoses, there's a lot of common use of the term PTSD, and a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of related stigma. So very much like depression, we use that term as well, right? Oh, we're depressed. But what does that really mean clinically? And so PTSD, I think, is becoming similar to that. That would be, yeah, my thought on that.
So it's a term people think they understand, but they really don't?
I think so. I think now it's very much like depression, how it became common parlance and a little bit watered down in terms of what it means. Clinically, we're going in that direction perhaps with PTSD as well. Like, oh, you know, something bad happened today. Oh, I have PTSD, and I hear people joke about that. Yeah, so it's a little bit more than that.
Now, what does the VA here do in terms of trying to help veterans who are having some legitimate issues with this?
Mm-hmm. So there are many, many ways that veterans can access treatment, and we like to say no wrong door. So at this stage, a veteran can call, they can go to eligibility and enrollment, they could be perhaps meeting with a primary care doc and say something like, hey, you know, doc, I have nightmares a lot, it's disturbing my sleep, or whatever. And that day, they can speak to a mental health professional. We have integrated primary care mental health, and so they can speak to somebody that day. We also now have walk-in mental health services over in Building 90 we were talking about earlier. So people can walk in and say, hey, I'm having a rough time right now, and sit down and talk with somebody.
Well, let's talk about why it seems like you put a real strong emphasis on immediate contact. Why is that?
Because when a person is struggling in that moment, we really want to be there. And we want to be there in an immediate way, because we want to be able to have mental health professionals assess that person. Where are you at? What's going on? Is this something where we need urgent kind of services? We have those as well. So if someone needs to come into the emergency department, they can even do that 24/7. They can call our Veterans Crisis Line. Anytime they need to talk to somebody about what's going on, we want to have something there available.
Does delay raise the risk that the difficulties are going to snowball and become more acute?
Sure. I mean, with PTSD in particular, one of the keys that sort of keeps people stuck, if you will, in past trauma is avoidance. They don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. And so the tendency is to try to push it away. And the longer you push it away, the longer it just kind of stays there unresolved. And so our preference is to get people in sooner rather than later.
Now, are these always a product of a traumatic, or could there be other experiences that would lead to it?
Oh yeah, no. PTSD can be related to a lot of different kinds of traumatic experiences, including natural disasters, car accidents, personal assaults of some kind, not just combat. So people can get PTSD from any number of events.
Does it take do sometimes the veterans not see it in themselves, or do they sometimes resist the idea that they need help?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that in our culture in general, we have this sense of, you know, we should be strong and independent people and take care of our own, and we may even get messages like that from our communities that say, oh, just get over it, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and things like that. So there is definitely still that stigma and that sense of, man, it's really tough to ask for help, just in general, but then add on the fact that these are veterans, trained soldiers or Marines or whatever, the strongest of the strong. That's tough, right? So it takes a lot of courage to come in and ask for help.
So we were talking about just how you get help. You know,
Right.
What happens next when there's a realization that somebody could use some attention?
Yeah. As I said, there are many ways that veterans can get in contact with mental health providers here, through the emergency department, through the 1-800 number, the Veterans Crisis Line, through primary care, through walk-in mental health, any number of ways. And so then what it usually looks like after that is sitting down with someone who has training to hear this person's presenting concerns. And if they hear them in a certain way, they're going to think, I need to direct this person towards specialty care. And PTSD treatment is considered specialty care. And so it usually comes through a consult process. So someone in another area will be talking with this veteran and they'll say, I think they have something going on here. They will send a consult to my team. And that's where we come in. And then we make contact with the veteran, we sit down again, we say, yeah, this really sounds like PTSD and kind of this is the direction we can go with that. And then we have some really fantastic evidence-based treatments, research-based treatments that we provide here, that we try to get them connected with those.
So what are the range of treatments that you might have?
Mm-hmm. So once a person is in the PCT, the PTSD clinical team, right, that specialty care level, we have either treatments that are focused on managing symptoms and kind of what they're coming in with day to day, or we have what are called exposure therapies. Those therapies involve either writing or talking about the traumas at length, so that that avoidance that we talked about earlier, that kind of fuels PTSD and keeps people stuck, we're gradually undoing that avoidance. We're giving them an opportunity to talk through these things that they've not talked about.
So they're venting basically, but in a positive way?
It's very structured, if you will. And yes, it's done in a particular way. We also, in one of the therapies, encourage people to go out, back out into life and do things that they've been avoiding doing because it makes them uncomfortable or anxious, or it reminds them of the trauma.
What would an example of those be?
Here's a classic, restaurants. Okay, a lot of veterans report being uncomfortable in restaurants, Walmart, the mall, a movie, all of these places where it may be dark, it may be crowded, there's a lot of activity or people moving around. They feel like they have to watch all the time. They have to be on guard, right? That's pretty difficult to do in these crowded, busy situations. So what happens is they tend to start avoiding them. Like, that's uncomfortable, I can't do that, I can't control it, I can't watch everybody. So they will gradually, their life starts to get very, very small. And the fewer things they do, the lower their quality of life. Does that make sense? So we try to get them moving back in those directions and doing those things again so that they have a quality of life.
Is it fair to say if they remove variety from their lives through this avoidance, then they dwell on some of the troubling things more?
Sure, you could see that. That would make sense, right? Now we're spending time at home, sitting on the couch or watching TV or whatever. Very little else going on in my life. Where's my mind going to go? Yeah.
Does it help to have other veterans involved?
Yeah, and that is definitely, I see that as very powerful sometimes. I do a group on Thursday mornings, and I think that is just terrific to have these guys come together who may have been thinking there's something wrong with me, like personally, like why can't I get over this? What's wrong with me? And when they come together in a room full of other veterans who are having very similar struggles, even if they might have been in different conflicts or different eras, they've gone through different things, they have the same struggles. And they get together in a room like that. It's very powerful.
Do you sometimes run into veterans from long ago conflicts, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and they're just now feeling
Yeah,
it?
Absolutely. Common phenomenon that we're seeing is that often one of the styles of avoidance, if you will, is workaholism. Okay, so they'll get into the work life and they'll work 80 hours a week, 60, 80 hours a week so that they don't have time to think about this stuff. When they retire, yeah, so we see that.
And fair to say that because there might be cultural differences in one generation versus the other, you might have to adjust your approach?
Oh, for sure, yeah. In fact, that's every individual. Every person I meet is an individual, and that's how they're treated. So we have evidence-based practices, we have research protocols. We follow those protocols, but within that, they're adjusted based on the individual.
I was saying something to Luke, and he said he had seen this study about just an hour or two ago. I just happened to find this, that in some cases, a fair number of veteran suicides are folks who never really presented with any kind of previous problem.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's one of the things to note about The suicide statistics say that, veterans have a higher rate of suicide, and PTSD, they have a slightly higher rate of suicide. We have to remember that those who are connected with the VA and who are connected with services, actually that lowers that risk, right? So that's the one thing I would say. If you can do it, get in, get treatment.
Well,
Doesn't
'cause-
matter how old you are or how long you've been doing things a certain way, you can get treatment.
All right, because with this study, we're talking about the folks who haven't come to your attention.
Exactly,
So-
exactly.
Now, it sounds like a lot of it is just therapy through the mind.
Mhm.
In some cases, do you resort to medications and that kind of stuff?
Medications are definitely available, and we have lots and lots of veterans who prefer to go that approach. Our current VA DoD guidelines actually recommend the behavioral therapies before medication. There's slightly stronger evidence that those should be the first line treatments. However, sometimes that's not people's preference. It takes time and it takes effort to do behavioral therapies. So.
Do folks ever basically say, okay, I'm cured of this problem, or is it more, all right, I've got reasonable control now?
Yeah. What I like to say to veterans, how I put it, is that PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, okay? What we do in treatment is we take away the D, all right? Disorder is defined in DSM as clinically significant distress or impairment in multiple roles of functioning. That's the part that we address. The trauma will be there, the memories will be there, right? There may be times in a person's life when that's more difficult, less difficult, right? But once we address that avoidance, you can go out and you can live a life and you can do things and you don't have to experience that clinically significant distress or impairment any longer.
Do you do things to help the family help the veteran?
Yes, we have therapies that will involve family members. We used to have, I don't know if it's still running, but we had a spouse and family support group also through the Vet Center. So we have a close collaborative relationship with the Vet Center as well. So we can often refer people for those kinds of services there too. Mhm.
Now, if somebody, number one, how should somebody recognize, oh yes, I could use some of this assistance?
Mhm. So some of the things that we look for are intrusive thoughts and memories that really bother the person, right? They're sitting there and just all of a sudden, bam, they're thinking about Iraq or whatever it was. Or there's that avoidance piece that's become really significant in their life. They can't go places, they can't do things. Another frequent presenting issue is anger and irritability, and that's often one that family members will be reacting to. So any number of things really can be the driver for someone coming in for treatment. Sometimes it's also substance use. Substance use is another avoidance strategy. That's how we view it, right? Doing the best you can to manage all of these upset, distressing feelings, and you may turn to alcohol or drugs. So they can come in that door as well, if you will, come through that treatment.
So it sounds like to some degree, and you described this early on, that when somebody just comes here for whatever reason, a lot of your people are trained to recognize this.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody is a situation where they just recognize in themselves, I need some help,
Mm-hmm.
what should they do? Where should they go?
So they can pick up, if they're not enrolled in services, right, they can get enrolled in our hospital services here at SAVAX by going through eligibility and enrollment, or they can actually just walk into Building 90, into the mental health clinic, and sit down and talk with somebody. Those folks are trained to actually help people then get connected with services, so they can help them with that next step of eligibility and enrollment. And the same kinds of things can happen through primary care.
And again, we talked about that's a big wall to climb over for that person to do that.
Yeah, just even coming here on campus, right? It's a big deal. It takes courage to come here. Yeah.
I think that's probably going to do it, particularly in
Yeah.
the tight confines of what we can put on the air. But is there anything you feel like you just want to add that we didn't touch upon?
I really would like people to know about how much information there is out there and ways to get accurate information about PTSD. So the National Center for PTSD has a website, ptsd.va.gov, Okay, great website, and it has whiteboard videos where people can learn more about PTSD. They also have something called a treatment decision aid. If they're not sure about treatment or they're not sure what kind of treatment, they can walk through a series of questions and it can help them with that. There's also a new section called About Face, a bunch of little about 3.5 minute videos of veterans who've actually been through treatment, talking about what that was like. And so that's all available to people on that national website.
Is PTSD often an issue to people who had actual combat wounds as well?
Sure, yeah. It can be a part of the whole picture, so, yeah.
Was there a certain time period where there was a recognition, like, oh yes, this is a growing issue we need to address?
Mm.
Was there like a period of time where you go like, okay, after the first Iraq War or whatever, there was a greater recognition this needed attention?
Actually, the diagnosis of PTSD was first in DSM in 1980, and most people attribute that to the efforts of the Vietnam veterans, the returning Vietnam veterans. They really put this issue on the map, and it's due to them and to their advocacy that we have the diagnosis of PTSD. Once we had the diagnosis, then people could start doing research, because that's how research gets funded, right? And they started doing research on treatments and such, and that's how we've ended up where we are today.
And before it was sort of recognized by other names, shell shock, whatever,
Sure,
but the
absolutely.
response was pull yourself together?
Exactly. Before, it was definitely a thing. It's been a thing forever. It's been a thing as long as we've had human beings. But, yeah, it was really in 1980 that it got on the books, so to speak.